We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. Gave myself a scare this week because had like a really minor sore throat, the type where before all of this I wouldn't have given it a second thought, wouldn't have thought anything of it, but I was like, what's that? And then I had that kind of like not totally well feeling, but then I'm like, well, that might just be psychosomatic, so let's see how this goes. So anyway, it lasted for all of 1.5 days, and then I felt totally fine on, Monday, I guess. So, I suspect it was just that I haven't run the air conditioner in my car for like several months, and it kicked in because the weather got warmer. And my apartment building, we don't have air conditioning throughout the building, but we have an air exchange, that goes from the basement part to the upper levels to exchange the air, and that kicked on for the first time in months. So I'm like, it's probably just an irritant in the air. Like I say, it's the type of thing I never would have given a second thought before, but in today's times, I was all scared. So that was last weekend for me. Fun.
So about a month ago, we noticed a leak coming out into our garage from our house. It was intermittent leak. And we've had this up before, and it was the bathroom that's right on the other side of that wall. Yeah. There was something wasn't connected properly, and it started leaking. So I figured that's just that again. Yeah. So I tried to fix it. My dad and I tried to fix it. We called a plumber out here, and they're like, yeah, it's that, but we don't know exactly where. You'll have to get a leak detection person out here. Mm-hmm. And then the coronavirus happened. Mm-hmm. So we've been kind of sitting on it going, okay, well, we'll just try to use this little water. We won't use that bathroom anymore. Okay. And then the leak will stop, and then afterwards we'll have somebody come and fix it, and then the leak started again, which means it wasn't that bathroom, it's something else. So after a month of us living with this thing and it just getting progressively worse, we finally called out somebody to come out, a leak detection person. And I was like the guy from Psych. Yep. Like memorizing everything he breathed on, everything he touched. We took doors off the hinges so that he wouldn't have to move a door. As
wouldn't have to touch something. Yep.
Yeah, we did everything we could, and then afterwards, of course, I wiped everything down with alcohol and everything else to make sure that it was safe. But we've got a burst pipe. It's in the bathroom behind the home theater, and they're going to have to jackhammer up at least 5 feet of that bathroom, and it looks like it might go right underneath the wall that goes between the home theater and the bathroom. So, yeah, so
perfect timing for that type of thing.
Now we're living with the leak, and we scheduled it for end of the month. We pushed it back, and it's a nightmare. I mean, other people have much worse things to worry about. I know that. I realize that. This is very much a first world problem. But, oh, man. Having somebody in my house was, very stressful.
And I mean, to keep some sanity, we should keep in mind that even though, so North America, this is Canada and the U.S., the number of testing, we're basically only testing people who are bad enough that they have to go in the hospital, right? That's more or less what's going on. So we can be pretty darn sure that the actual number of infected people is probably, 10 times that? Maybe not quite higher. That. 8 or 9 times that. Very likely. But still, even with that multiplier, if you take that as a percentage of the total population, it's still a really small number of people when you actually break it down that way. Right. So, I mean, you try to say it's probably not every person you see, and yet there's the horrible asymptomatic carrying of things. You know what? Right. We're all dealing with this stuff. We've had people outright say thank you for continuing to talk about it because they're glad to hear how we're doing. They like to know how Tom and Rob are doing. And then It's just that there are good reminders, and it's like we have to stay vigilant on this thing. So we've had people thank us, and then we've had other people say, and I completely understand this, I don't want to hear anything about it because it's everywhere and I want to get away. You know what? I understand both sides, but here's what I'll say to the people who really don't want to hear anything about it at all. I'm sorry about that, but Tom and I, this is when we see each other. Tom and I are friends.
The only time we talk, really.
You know, it's on our minds like it's on everybody's minds, and if it comes up, it comes up, and we're not going to censor ourselves, and it's not the bulk of the 2 hours that we do here, not at all. So for some people, I apologize that this is how we started out. For other people, that's the update for Tom and Rob, and there it is. That's the beginning. Maybe we can go to the podcast now.
I guess so. I had more things to say.
I
did get the new brackets for the elevation speakers, and they did fix everything.
Perfect.
So it wasn't the bracket on the back of the speaker; it was a bracket that was attached to the wall, because of course it was.
Okay. Well, actually, that's easier to replace, though, isn't it? Like
No.
Oh, I thought the ones on the back
is
of the speaker were like more involved to detach and attach new ones.
Literally a screw.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I was displeased about that, but not their fault. But they're up there now. They're pretty stable, and I think it was just like a matter of whatever they had like a kind of foam liner.
Yeah.
On and I think that just wasn't as thick on my particular bracket as it has been on some of the other ones in the past.
Weird.
It's what it is. It's fine.
Yeah.
At this point, I'm just happy that they're up there. One more project done. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can go to avrant.com and leave us a comment there. Facebook.com/avrantpodcast. YouTube.com/avrant. Rob's email is rob@avrant.com. You can contact him directly on Twitter at FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter is at avrant_Tom. And for the first time in like 5 years, I tweeted.
Yeah, you more than once. It wasn't even just a singular tweet. There was more than one.
There was more than one tweet this week. So my Twitter account has risen from the dead like a zombie.
That's right.
Like a COVID-inspired zombie. Oh my God, we watched Saturday Night Live.
From home.
We watched that. Yeah, from home. We were watching an episode of Jimmy Kimmel, whatever the Tonight shows with Jimmy Kimmel. Everybody looks awful.
They don't have their lighting and regular makeup. That is...
Nobody's looking at the camera.
Oh,
you look at the camera, Jimmy. Please, look at the camera. I mean, I don't know. I don't look at the camera, but I'm reading like 700,000 words, all right? If I had a teleprompter, I'd be looking at the camera. Anybody want to spring for a teleprompter? I'll be happy to use it. But yeah, it was just I was like, why is he looking over my shoulder the whole time?
That's what his teleprompter is now.
Or his computer,
yeah.
Listeners of the week. I want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week to support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com and click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link on the right side of the page. That will take you to a PayPal donation site. We want to thank Rohan and Andrew for doing that. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, Andrew.
Yeah, Rohan, Andrew, thank you very much for those donations via PayPal. It's appreciated.
We also want to thank our 112 patrons over at patreon.com. Patreon's a service where it's a monthly subscription to your content creators of choice. It's a minimum $1 per content creator, and if you choose us, we will thank you if you tell us that you did it, because I'm not thanking 112 people every week. So we want to thank Nathan, who mentioned that he says he never thought he would be deciding between a 40-inch Vizio and a Royal Moon headset while being stuck in an RV, but these are strange times. And he also has the option of using a portable projector with a built-in battery, but the only place the screen could go in his RV would block his access to the bathroom. But we all got to make some sacrifices, right? You're in the RV, dude. The great outdoors can be your bathroom.
Maybe that's what he meant. Maybe it blocks the entrance. That's what
that could be. Maybe it's like I'm trapped in here for 2 hours. It's just like going to the real movies.
That's right.
There's just you can't leave until
even more so.
Move some. God help you if you're watching the Lord of the Rings extended version marathon. You're doomed.
But thank you very much to our 112 patrons. That's patreon.com/AVRant podcast. For anybody who might like to sign up, a voluntary subscription to keep funding the podcast while things are going on, if you're enjoying it. So Nathan, thank you so much for writing in with that little bit of humor, and thank you for being one of our patrons for sure.
So if you can't support us financially, we completely understand, especially in these trying times. So if you do something that supports the podcast in any way, just let us know what it is, and we'll mention you. So Ben told Accessories for Less that we sent him their way when he bought a Denon X3500H to replace his Pioneer receiver that died. When his wife asked what having no receiver would mean, she told him he had to order a new one, which was just as well, since Denon was already on his online shopping cart.
Done and done, said Ben. Well, thank you very much for talking us up to Accessories for Less, and congrats on the purchase.
So the receiver's broken. What does that mean? Do we really need a new one? Well, do you like to see and hear the movies? Because that's what it does. Oh, yeah. You need a new one of those, like, now. Joseph mentioned to Mini DSP when he bought a Mini DSP 2x4 and a UMic 1 from them. So mention this at Mini DSP.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph, and congrats on those purchases, too.
And shots go off to Nathan and Gurinder for their lighthearted ribbing of Rob for getting so worked up last week that he swore on Twitter and said president when he meant prime minister. Rob was just all out of sorts that day. So
I didn't even catch it. I'm glad Gurinder mentioned it. I caught it, of course, when I went back through the podcast later in the week, but I was like, yeah, my mind is a mess. I couldn't find the normal concentration level I have putting together this week's topic list. I'm like, I'll do like one question at a time because that's all I can focus on right now. It's taking a toll, unfortunately, all this stuff.
Oh yeah, and I mean, you live alone, which is. But you have an essential job, so you have to go out and interact with people.
And it's busier than it's ever been. I'm listening to some stuff at least at points throughout the day because I usually have some down. I got no downtime now. So actually, I'll mention some people were talking about we'll come across this in the comments, but like there's webinars and stuff that are happening. A lot of companies are putting those on right now, and I'm just like, I appreciate everyone who's saying, hey, here's a cool thing you might want to check out. I would love to. I got no time, and it's not a matter of me not appreciating it or not understanding that most people have some time at home to watch it right now. But for me personally, just not the case at the moment. So I'm missing a lot of that stuff, unfortunately.
It's a silver lining thing here, though, is that you're actually out of the house and interacting with other people, whereas like I'm stuck in this house and I don't see anybody other than the people that are here. If I was here alone, I would be going just nuts.
Well, the thing I gotta say is the people who are out, out in the public now that I'm interacting with, there are only two kinds. The best people and the worst people, and there is no in between, because everybody who's in between is doing a darn good job in my area of staying home. That's what they're doing. The people who are out either have to be out because they got important jobs that are like keeping everybody going. They are the best people. And then the absolute worst people. And that is all I see.
I was in line to get into the grocery store the other day because everybody was standing 6 feet apart. And standing in this line, and this couple walked in behind me, too close. They weren't 6 feet away. They weren't wearing masks. They weren't doing all this stuff. And the first thing the guy says is, I think they're blowing this whole pandemic thing out of proportion. This is ridiculous. Having to stand. And like everyone around us all looked back at him and then took a step away. It's like, yep, that's the guy who's going to have it. If anybody in this line has it, it's that guy. Don't stand next to him in the vegetable aisle and don't pick up anything he's touched because he's touching it all. So yeah, we're all in this together, guys. We're gonna have fun. We're gonna talk. Listen, for those of you who don't want to hear about it anymore, I completely understand. But I want to tell you, for a lot of people out there, including me, if you just try to power through this on your own, if you just try to power through whatever emotions you're feeling, like Rob was describing, you just hinting at it there a second ago, and we haven't talked about this beforehand, but just powering through, these sort of weird emotional roller coaster things that are happening. If I didn't have my wife here to talk about some of this stuff, I would be a disaster. A disaster. I was literally falling apart about 2 weeks ago. About 2 weeks ago, emotionally, I was a mess. And one night, I just sat down with my wife for like 3 hours and just vented and just released all of my stress. And I have felt so much better ever since. So if you are like, oh, no, I got this. This is no big deal. I got this. You got to find somebody to talk to, whoever it is. And, there is somebody, I mean, obviously there's professionals and things that you can do, but if you have somebody in your life that you trust, that you feel that you can be emotionally vulnerable with, please reach out to them. Do not keep it all inside, because that really can eat you up. So
yeah, I mean,
that's the last thing I'll say on that.
There's no playbook for this. Nobody who's alive today. Well, maybe there's could somebody have been alive in 1918? I suppose somebody could be alive 102, 103, 104. Although they wouldn't have much of a memory of it if they're, say, 104 at this point. 2 years old. I wouldn't count on it. So I mean, for all intents and purposes, everybody who's alive today, there's no playbook for this. We haven't been through something like this before. So there's no right or wrong in how you feel. There's no right or wrong in your opinion of whether you want to hear about it or not. I mean, all things are valid, but Tom and I are going to be who we are, and this will be our podcast until this thing clears up.
This is it. All right, the news. Sony revealed that the PlayStation 5's new controller, so it's the DualSense.
It's the name. It's not a DualShock 5. It's a DualSense.
I want somebody to make another controller that has 3 things on it, like the GameCube one.
It was the N64 that had the
N64
the 3
one.
handles.
That is the 3 handles. That third handle where you're like, who was the mastermind behind this ergonomic nightmare that I'm holding in my hand right now?
I like the N64 controller. It's just, you could only use the D-pad or the analog stick, not both.
Yes. Not both. Anyway, so it's the DualSense. It has a two-tone color design. Its overall shape and size are closer to an Xbox controller than ever, and honestly, the Xbox controller is way better than the PlayStation controller. I think we can all agree on that.
The ergonomics of holding it, I would agree.
Yeah. So overall shape and size are... Oh, wait, I never said that. The 2 analog sticks remain both in the lower positions, though no offset sticks here. They've gone with clear buttons that look like the PS Vitas, and the touchpad remains. The light bar is just strips of light around the touchpad now, which makes it seem like it won't be able to work with the PSVR. It has a microphone built in, so you don't need a separate headset for chat. Oh, that's lovely. It has a rechargeable battery with a USB-C port, unlike the Xbox Series X controller that still uses AA batteries. And the share button has been relabeled as the create button.
That's right.
Woo, we're creating. The name DualSense comes from its haptic feedback, which is built into the grips and also has variable tension in the triggers. Oh, that's nice, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a good way to break your triggers, but whatever. Yeah.
I'm sure it's not that much, but it's the you're pulling back the bow on a bow and arrow in the game, and it'll actually feel that tension in the trigger now.
Yeah, it's just going to be the exact same experience, honestly.
That's right.
Very similar.
You'll be able to pick up a real life bow and arrow and be a master
right afterwards.
At it.
You'll just be.
You've been muscle memory trained for sure.
That's it. Lara Croft. You should just get the outfit and wear it while you're doing it, because you're basically training for that. All right, Disney Plus already has reached 50 million subscribers in just 5 months, which is not surprising considering this pandemic could not have been better engineered to make streaming more viable than ever before. But
they said they were aiming for 60 million within the first year, and sure does look like they will hit that and then some. Yes.
And at the same time, AMC Theaters, the largest theater chain in the U.S., appears to be headed right for bankruptcy. So
yeah,
that's also another shock. Wait, they're only losing like tens of thousands of dollars a day per theater. Jeez,
not great. That Stubbs A-list subscription really isn't paying off too much at this very moment.
Yeah.
It's gonna be lasting changes after all this.
Who knows?
Definitely.
Who knows? All I know is my theater's finally perfectly set up.
Right.
I just have to rerun Audyssey one more time. I just got to do it one more time, and then I'm done. And it's good. And I'm done. Some comments here. Brian, John, and Joe just wanted to remind any AVRant listeners who might have some time in their hands right now that several home theater companies like SVS Trinnov and what?
Meridia.
What?
That's where Anthony Gramani is over there right now. So that was one of them.
They're hosting webinars and Facebook video groups where they spend an hour or two going in depth and answering questions. So keep an eye out. Okay, let me just, all you people who do these things, between 5 and 7 p.m., no matter what time zone you're in, is a bad time. Okay? It is a bad time. All right, SVS did theirs, and I saw it pop up on Facebook, and I clicked on it, and there was Gary and Nick and some other dude. I don't remember who it was. And, they're like, oh, post in the chat. Oh, we got a lot of people here. Let's all talk. I'm like, it's 5 o'clock. I got to go feed my children. I am cooking. I'm not, this is a bad time.
Would have been 2 o'clock for me, so that is a weird time.
Well, just like, whatever. So, yeah, guys, come on. Just do it at a normal time. I mean, now normal time, lunch. Do it at lunch. The kids are, home anyways. So if people are able to attend this at 5, believe me, they're able to attend it at 7. At noon as well. Carl on Twitter wanted to point out that the Amazon Fire TV 4K and the Roku Ultra both include OS level settings for changing the frame rates to match the content, similar with the Apple TV 4K. However, Carl did find that HBO Go still doesn't switch frame rates on the Fire TV, so there's apparently still some amount of support that needs to be programmed into the apps themselves. So I read all that out loud, but I didn't actually comprehend anything. But I guess it's interesting.
Yeah, it's we were talking about 24 frames per second support, and I mentioned how the Apple TV 4K does a really good job of it. Automatically switches, applies to all the apps on the Apple TV 4K. So thanks to Carl, because I don't use Roku Ultra, I don't use an Amazon Fire TV 4K. So he's got like all the streaming boxes, which is great. I know who to come to when I have questions on streaming boxes that I don't use. So thank you, Carl. And that's good news. The more devices that support proper 24 hertz and 60 hertz switching, because we want them to be able to switch back and forth. That's kind of the key. And the more that do it, the better. So that's really good. Jay
knows that we are advocates for using dual subwoofers and positioning them across the room from one another and avoiding having both subs at the front of the room.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right, okay. But some people still seem to do it no matter what we say. So Jay wanted to share Tom Norton's write-up in Sound and Vision. It's not that there's anything particularly different from what we say. He's following the same research by Dr. Toole and Sean Olive from Harman, but he shows measurements of his setup in this and goes through the whole process in detail, so it might help convince some more people. Yeah, the people who read Sound and Vision, I guess.
That's right. Well,
people who listen to this podcast probably don't read Sound and Vision.
That's perfectly fine. But sometimes people want a whole in-depth write-up with the graphs and measurements and everything. So we'll have the link for Tom Norton's article in Sound and Vision. That's good stuff.
All right. Dan, last week we discussed Nick's home theater plans, in which Nick wanted to mount a JVC NX7 projector at the back of his room beneath a soffit that is only 6 feet 9 inches from the floor. Dan also has an NX7. He just wanted to warn Nick that the mounting holes on the bottom of the NX7 are unusually far apart. So many universal mounts actually don't fit it without an adapter. That's just something to be aware of. Yeah. Since then, Nick is concerned about getting the projector as close to the underside of the soffit as possible while also maintaining excellent soundproofing. Dan wanted to share the mounting method he used. Dan used decoupling brackets to mount a piece of wood in between his ceiling joist above the drywall. The projector is mounted to that, which allows you to get the height wherever you need it. And then the pole of the mount extends through the hole with a gasket in the drywall. This also provides the benefit of the projector essentially having a shock mount so the image doesn't move if the structure of the house vibrates at all, I guess, during earthquakes.
Well, also just somebody walking upstairs, that can be enough. Somebody goes thump, thump, thump across upstairs, and you see your projector image go bump, bump, bump. So, yeah, that's a good idea. I've seen other mounts that are similar to this idea. So, good to hear that it worked. And yes, that point about the mounting holes on the NX7 being unusually far apart is a very good thing to be aware of. It's important to make sure that whatever ceiling mount you purchase will work with that particular model of projector.
Brandon previously asked if he should use the Paradigm Cinema 110 5-speaker package or the DefTech Pro Cinema 1000 2000 speaker package in his roughly 20 by 20 master bedroom. We said the physically larger DefTech speakers would be beneficial in this case, and he just wanted to report that we were spot on. He ended up trying both. And while the Paradigms might have had a touch more detail in the treble, the DefTechs were a big improvement in mid-bass and just sheer overall output. So he's happy with those, and they're making staying at home much more enjoyable, which is, at this point in this podcast, what we were really here for.
That's right.
I mean, if you're going to be stuck in your house for another month, which is looking likely, then you better have a nice home theater to sit in and enjoy movie night with your families.
Well, Brandon, I'm really glad to hear that. And for anyone wondering, like, why would the Paradigm sound more detailed? It might just be the tweeters that they use sometimes with that, but it can also be the case that when you have a system that is producing more mid-bass, there's that little bit of masking that happens to the treble detail. It's just how your brain works when you're hearing comparatively percentage-wise more mid-bass. Sometimes even if the treble were the same, you would interpret it, you would perceive it as being somewhat less. So not entirely sure what's going on there, but whatever. Brandon's happy, that's all that matters, and that's great. Turned out good.
All right. Okay. I'm really glad he tried them both. I wasn't expecting that. Most people don't. Ian. All right, these are the actual questions now, people. All right. So Rob, future Rob, who's putting the timestamp now.
That's right.
Ian, we've mentioned a couple of times recently how corner bass traps don't specifically have to straddle the vertical corners of our room, and it's simply the most geometrically efficient placement, and Ian totally gets that. But he's read something to the effect of bass collects in corners and along walls and boundaries many times. And in his own experience, if he goes and stands in a corner or leans against a wall, the bass does seem to be amplified, often to the point of sounding boomy in those locations. Often? How about always? But let's go in those locations. So is there truth to the phase that of bass collecting in corners? And if so, is that not also a good reason to put bass traps in the corners whenever possible? So the collecting, I mean... if you were to fill a square tank with water, and you were to splash in it, and you watch the waves go out and hit the corners and come back, would you say that they collected there?
Yeah, it's a word choice thing, but
but so basically, what's happening here is there's, the waves reflect off of these flat surfaces, right?
Yeah.
So when they do, they go out at an angle depending on the angle that they came in at, which makes perfect sense if you've ever played pool before, right? Billiards. So if it goes hits in the middle of the wall, where it hits the middle of the wall, then it comes straight back out, or maybe it goes off to a side, and then it'll hit a side wall sometime later, and then maybe the front wall, and then the other side wall. That you can imagine. But if it's hitting in that corner, it can hit one wall and then bounce to the other wall, and then maybe even bounce back to that first wall again before it actually reflects back out again. So collecting is maybe not it sounds like there's more bass there than there would be, but this just happening is the waves are reflecting more often in a short span.
Yeah. I mean, it's so... The word choice aside, and I mean, it's not Ian using that. I've seen that exact word used in descriptions and articles and things, right?
Yeah.
So
that's
that's
experts.
That's right. Totally fair that's where that came from. But let's just put the word choice aside. It is just exactly that. If you just visualize what water would look like in a rectangular pool, and you're making little waves, dropping little stones into that pool of water at various points around the pool, what you would see is these like eddies and more interaction happening in those corners just because of the angles. All these waves are bouncing off and interacting with each other, and you're seeing these very choppy looking sections, more so than right in the middle of the field of the pool, along the edges, and especially in the corners you will see this sort of choppy thing. So yes, the idea that you're going to place bass traps where there is the most bass wave interaction also does make sense. Geometrically, it's efficient to put them in the corners, and you are also having those bass waves bouncing around off of all of those boundaries. So it's a good place to put a trap and turn some of that energy into heat instead of allowing it to just continue to bounce around. As opposed to you take one big, thick 8-inch panel and stick it, not in the exact middle of your room, but, kind of somewhere in the middle area of your room. And you're imagining how many of the waves would be hitting that bass trap there versus how many waves would be hitting it in a corner. If you visualize it that way, it totally makes sense. That's where you're going to put it to be most efficient.
Right. Kevin. So last year, Audioholics reported on Dolby's plans to restrict which Upmixers would be allowed to work with Dolby audio formats. Basically, any Dolby signal would only work with the Dolby Surround Upmixer, and any DTS signal would only work with the DTS Neural X Upmixer, no cross-pollination. Did that ever happen? Did that ever happen? Is a firmware update going to impose this restriction on the Denon X7200WA that he just bought at some point? I feel like that happened. Didn't that happen? I don't...
So,
I feel like that happened.
Audioholics actually had some of the best reporting on this because they really brought it to the public's attention when Dolby first mentioned this. It was more like a sort of behind-the-scenes thing. This is what they were telling AV receiver manufacturers and stuff that they were going to have to do. And Audioholics sort of brought it to the public attention. There was a bit of a backlash, and Audioholics then also reported that Dolby withdrew that restriction before it was ever really totally applied. Now, there's an interesting thing where if you look at, like in particular, Denon's X3600H, that's, the current one that came out at the tail end of 2019. If you look at the manual there, it only describes Dolby signals being upmixed by the Dolby Surround Upmixer, and it only describes DTS signals being upmixed by the DTS Neural X Upmixer. So it was as though they had developed it under those restrictions. I don't actually know if right this minute you can do the cross-pollination of upmixers or not in that model. According to the manual, you can't, but it's possible that in reality you can, or it could be where a future firmware update will actually reinstitute the ability on that particular model to do the cross-pollination. But
I kind of feel like mine won't let me do that, but maybe it does, and I just don't really pay attention to it.
Yours should.
I'm probably just not paying attention to it. Because I kind of felt like whenever it's Dolby, it goes into this. But maybe I just switch to DTX. By
default, it certainly is. If you use the auto mode, or if you just, the first press that you do on the listening mode button, if you're in a Dolby, getting a Dolby signal, it'll go to Dolby Surround Upmixer first. But you should have the manual option of scrolling to the DTS Neural X Upmixer on just a Dolby digital signal.
So will his, did you already answer this? Oh, no,
I think so.
Will his 7200 WA utilize his front wide speakers when he's using Dolby Surround Upmixer, or only in DTS X modes? I feel like that's opposite.
Right. So
Dolby was the only one that will do front wides, and DTS X never will. Is that right?
No. So
is it opposite?
It's important to get the names correct so that we don't spread any confusion on this. So Dolby Atmos, actual Atmos. It's off Ultra HD Blu-ray, or it's coming from Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever, but actual Atmos can use front wide speakers, but only if the mixers have used objects in the floor level speakers, which they're not required to do. They might do the floor level in nothing but channels, and if they have done that, then your front wides won't get used. But if they've used objects in the floor layer with actual Dolby Atmos, you might get front wide information. Same with DTS X. So actual DTS X soundtracks, which... Can you get those on anything outside of Ultra HD Blu-rays and a handful of regular Blu-rays? I haven't seen DTS X used on any streaming services as of yet. Not that I'm aware of. But in any case, actual DTS X, similar to Dolby Atmos, if they've used objects in the floor level, they could potentially make use of front wides. Now, the Upmixers are a different story. The Dolby Surround Upmixer will never put any sounds into your front wide speakers. So if you have front wides and you want them to make sound, you basically never want to use the Dolby Surround Upmixer. On the DTS side, their Upmixer is called Neural X, which, the naming conventions. But DTS Neural X can use front wide speakers, but the limitation of DTS Neural X is that it can only ever use 11 speakers total. It cannot go beyond 11 speakers, and it basically prioritizes, with the front wides being the last pair of speakers it might add. So let's say you've set up 13 speakers. You're only going to use 11 of them at a time, but you've set up 13 speakers. You set up 7 traditional speakers, 4 overheads, and your front wides, and those are your 13 speakers. Well, DTS Neural X will try to use the 7 traditional speakers and the 4 overheads and leave the front wides silent. That's what it would try to do. You would have to actually, in your amplifier assign in your AV receiver, say that you have, let's say, 5 traditional floor speakers, 4 overheads, and front wides for 11 speakers total. Then it will use the front wides, but only within that 11 speaker total container. So yeah, not the easiest thing to always keep straight, but basically if you want to upmix, you got to use the DTS Neural X Upmixer and make sure that you have specified only 11 speakers total.
So his room is 26 feet long, 18 feet wide, and 8 feet high. His main seats are 14 feet from the front wall. And he has a secondary seating area behind those. His room is heavily treated with carpet on the floor as well as multiple layers of carpet on all the walls. How do you get multiple layers of carpet on your walls?
He must have hung them somehow, right?
Yes. Yeah. You can't nail them all up to each other.
Yeah, in his images, he says he's got 3 layers of heavy Berber carpet that are on his walls.
Okay.
Yeah.
He goes, those are hidden behind curtains, and he has a acoustic ceiling tile, so he's got lots of absorption. He has 11 speakers total and 4 subs. 2 speakers are up high on his front wall directly above his front left and right main speakers, and another 2 speakers on his back wall where they could be considered either surround backs or rear heights. So there we go.
Yeah.
The backs, it looks like the secondary seating area is like a lounge. It's a couch on the back wall and the couch on the side wall. But the main seating area is 2 3-seater, 2 3-seater couches.
Side by
I feel
side,
like I've seen this. We've helped create this theater.
I think so. Probably.
This is the one with the beam in the middle of it, and he was trying to figure out how to make this thing work. Yes. Anywho, it's nice.
Yeah.
It's dark. It's very dark.
Yeah, when the lights are off, I'm sure it is dark in there.
Yeah, I can't really. There's so much stuff. Anyways, so I'm scrolling past all
I
these
do like
pictures.
his custom covers for his front speakers. He's put up these red covers. I'm sure those are acoustically transparent, but those cover up his front speakers. It's pretty cool looking.
Yeah. Oh, I see it now. Yeah, so it's like a custom grill cloth that he
basically,
put over it or something.
Yeah.
All right,
It's cool.
All right, well, that's fine. So how should he label the speakers in his room to take maximum advantage of Atmos and DTS-X and their Upmixers while using his front wides?
Yeah. So, I mean, that I basically sort of went over that just in the last question. Yeah, you'd want to label the pair of speakers that you have at the back of your room as rear heights. That's how you would not want to label them as surround backs, because if you did label them as surround, well, he's got 11 speakers total, so either way, but you would end up with a 9.4, because he's got 4 subwoofers, a 9.4.2 setup, and you definitely want to try and keep 4 overhead speakers so that you can have front to back panning as well as left to right above you. So I would label the speakers at the back of your room as rear heights for sure. So I would say you have a 5.4.4 plus front wides setup.
Yeah. So he asked, lastly, should he replace his his height speakers with in-ceiling speakers? I don't really see why.
Well,
you got them up there already. I mean, you could. Are you going to properly place them for that middle couch? Is that what you're going to do?
Right.
Are you going to put? Yeah. If that's what you're going to do, then yeah. But if you're just going to, have front heights and rear heights, way towards the back and front walls, and have them in ceiling speakers, I say stick with what you got.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly try just what you have already, because obviously that's the easiest thing to do, is just call them front heights and rear heights and give it a go. But I will say, his front heights in particular are, they're right above his left-right speakers and not much separation between them. And then his what he would end up calling rear heights are not actually all the way up his back wall. They're high on his back wall, but not all the way up to his ceiling. And this is a pretty large room. So if you actually worked out the elevation angles of his front heights and rear heights, those aren't going to be even at 30-degree elevation angles. They're going to be lower than that. Now, that's not the end of the world. Like I say, I would genuinely recommend just trying it where they are right now, because that's the easiest. But I'm looking at that.
I'm confused about his front speakers here, because he's got this big thing outlined, and we can see the top half of it.
Yeah,
which is definitely a woofer mid-range tweeter that's going from the ceiling down. So the speaker looks like it's upside down with the tweeter.
Yeah, I don't know if he's doing a pseudo line array with 2 of them stacked on top of each other.
That's what it looks like to me. Yeah, he's got dual center channels.
It sure looks that way. Yeah.
So yeah. And his heights are, his speakers are very high, they're very near the ceiling, but they're very tall. They're tall and thin somehow.
Yeah.
Because we think there's 2 of them.
It sure looks like it's 2 of them.
They're stacked on top of each other, basically one right side up and one upside down.
Correct.
Essentially.
Yeah.
And then if you were to set another speaker on top of that, that would be his front heights. That's how close they are to the other speakers.
Exactly.
Now, if you look at the distance between the speaker and the height speaker and the tweeter of the top thing, it's maybe a couple of feet, but yeah, if you're gonna move these into the room, put them on. I mean, because he's got a drop tile ceiling,
right?
So
it's easier installation than a lot of places. I
believe you will get a much better Atmos experience.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm still saying that Atmos. Yeah, my belief on Atmos is still fairly like meh. So
you're pretty come see come saw about Atmos in general, but
yeah, you pulling out the French.
If you're looking for a that's above me sensation, I think potentially changing the ceiling speakers in your instance, it might make sense just because you don't have a lot of separation from your front heights and what would be your rear heights to the other speakers. So yeah, I think there's some justification perhaps for switching to actual in-ceiling speakers in your case.
I'm confused about this. Are there two setups in here?
No.
Okay, so then how come there's a vertical center channel underneath one of them?
Well, yeah, that must be an older picture because he's definitely got them side by side when you look at how the speaker grills go.
I'm going to be honest with you, dude. I'm going to be like 100% honest with you. None of this makes any sense to me.
I'm pretty sure he's just got two for his... like two each for his front left, front right, and center. Because
but I just don't understand why. This is what
I think he wanted more output, but he's doing the pseudo line array thing to do it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yep.
I wonder what this is doing with comb filtering.
I know.
There's a lot of things in here that I would worry about as far as harming the fidelity of the sound that you're actually getting. If you're really having that much problem with output, then the solution is not to stack more of the same speakers on top of each other or put them side by side like you have with your center. It's to get rid of the entire mess and start again with something that can output what you want.
I'm pretty sure we actually went over those things before. It might have been a year or two ago, but yeah.
I don't remember.
I'm pretty sure we did.
Okay, whatever. Yeah. All right. We'll just assume that this is a done deal, and yes, put them on the ceiling.
That's right.
Francisco says he is new to our podcast and he's curious to hear our take on the upgrade he's considering. Welcome aboard. Hold on to your seat. I might offend you. It could happen. It's happened before. Not going to be on purpose. You seem like a nice enough gentleman, I assume. His living room area is roughly 15 by 15 feet, but is open to his kitchen and dining room plus another opening into a bedroom. The bedroom doesn't have a door? There's no door to your bedroom? That seems unusual, but okay. maybe it's one of those beaded curtains.
Yeah,
very, very 70s. I like it. I like your style, man. Anyways, he currently has a 75-inch Samsung Q80R, a Pioneer Elite SC99 receiver, which can process 7.9.4, 9 amps built in. DefTech BP9040 towers and center, one Martin Logan Dynamo 1000 subs, a sealed 12-inch 500-watt, and it claims down to 22 hertz, and then Energy C20 speakers for surrounds with Klipsch in-ceiling Atmos speakers. Well, there's odd man out in that group. I'll let you guys decide who it is. He is set on getting dual rhythmic FV15 HP subs as an upgrade. He would also like to upgrade his front 3 DefTech speakers, so he says he is primarily looking for better clarity. He had Klipsch speakers up front before, but he found them extremely bright, so he doesn't want to go that route. What he likes best in his own house is his separate 2-channel setup in a home office room where he's using a pair of B&W speakers. He says the bass in his living room sounds boomy, but he has confirmed that it isn't his Martin Logan subwoofer. If he just plays the sub, the bass is clean, although it doesn't dig down below 25. His DefTech speakers with their built-in powered subwoofer drivers are definitely the culprit, he says, so he is presently considering Chane, or Ascend speakers. What is our take and what is our recommendation? Not Chane.
Yeah, those are worlds apart in what our personal opinions are of those. One of those we like very much, Ascend, and one of those we would not recommend buying, which would be Chane. Which, again, we're going to get lots of downvotes because those Chane people, they're like a cult. But
not like a. They just haven't all bought the same pants yet. They've all got the same shoes and polo shirt, though. Don't worry.
But yes, if you've boiled down to those two, I will certainly say to go Ascend. And I mean, if you did the what I've said frequently about Ascend speakers is if you don't like how they sound, it's something else. The speakers are just telling it like it is. And we can say that for some other brands too, SVS Ultra speakers, Aperion Varus Grand speakers, the higher end KEF speakers, PSB speakers. I mean, lots of speakers out there are the type where I would basically say, yeah, these are telling it like it is. And if you don't like the way it sounds, it's something else. But out of those two, I mean, I certainly have no qualms just saying, go get yourself some Ascends because they are really, really good and high value speakers.
Well, there's a couple things we could try here first. Too.
Yes.
I mean, clearly, you have learned through bitter experience that having subwoofers in your main speakers isn't always the panacea that many people will have you think it is. All right? Not your fault. There's a lot of marketing out there that's telling you that this is a great thing to have, and we're here to tell you it ain't. But just because you got them in there doesn't mean that you have to use them as full range speakers.
I mean, there's little doubt that when you run MCACC, your automatic setup program in your Pioneer, with your DefTech speakers, and by the way, we will tell you that your DefTech speakers with their built-in powered subwoofer drivers should be plugged into the wall, and they should be powered on because the crossover for those powered drivers it's at least 300. I think it's 500 hertz where they cross over, but it's at least 300 hertz. So it's not like we want you to turn off those powered woofers.
Well, they're needed to get down to the 70, 60, 70 hertz that they need to for the crossover of 80 that we want you to set.
That's right, but MCACC is for sure going to set them to large, or if not large, a 40 hertz crossover at the most. And you have the option of manually overriding that, setting them to small, not large, and choosing a higher crossover frequency, and the option of just turning those powered woofers down so that they aren't playing as loud full stop to begin with. There's quite, unfortunately, a lot of trial and error type of adjustment that can be done, and cleaning all of that up might, like I talked about before at the top of this podcast, sometimes when you have an excess of mid-bass, it makes the detail and clarity seem like it isn't there. We don't perceive it. It's being masked by that excessive mid-bass, but it actually is there where our brain just has trouble hearing it when it's being masked by something else. So it's possible you don't actually need to upgrade your DefTech speakers, and we don't know what your acoustic situation is. We know you've got an open concept space, and those are generally kind of difficult to deal with. It's entirely possible that if you took your DefTech speakers into your office area where you've got your two-channel setup, that you'd think those speakers are a lot better. But that's down to room acoustics, not just the speakers alone. The speakers have to work with the room.
This is what I want you to do, Francisco. I want you to go into your receiver. I want you to change the size of your main speakers to small. And anything else that says large, change them all to small. Yeah. Set all the crossovers to 80 hertz. Yeah. And then just listen for a while. I don't even want you to buy new subwoofers. I know you want to. I know you do. And I believe me, I am the last person in the world who should talk about somebody not buying a subwoofer. Because if somebody said, hey, Tom, we want to get you some new subwoofers, would you want some new subwoofers? I would say yes before I even they even got past the do ya. Okay, because yes, I do. I always love new subs. But the fact is, you may find that just doing that one little change changes your perception of everything else that's going on in this room so much that you might not need. Because first, you are not pressurizing. Yes, you can buy enough subwoofers to pressurize your house. Sure.
And the FV15 HPs are a high value way of doing that. They can output a ton of bass, and in an open concept space, I'm not going to even try to talk you out of those. That's the perfectly fine choice. And the one sub you have right now, it doesn't play all the way down to 20 hertz. It's just an objective fact. So the subwoofers we're not really going to quibble about. And honestly, if you went and got some Ascend speakers, I'm not going to quibble about that either because I know how good and reliable they are. But I would encourage you, in addition to what Tom just said of setting things up, possibly changing some settings in your surround sound setup in this open concept space, try taking your DefTech towers into that office area where you have your B&Ws, have a listen there, because if you say, hey, wait a second, actually these def techs sound a lot better in here than I thought these speakers sounded, well, then that tells you, oh, it's actually my room acoustics. That's what I really need to deal with. And your money could be better spent dealing with your room acoustics, possibly. We don't know. Sometimes you can't change much in an open concept space, but it would at least let you know whether it really is a speaker upgrade you need and want, or if it's some other part, the room, that needs changing.
Right. So, especially when it comes to bass, we're always talking about subwoofer placement and stuff like that, and that's simply because, if you're a new listener, it's simply because the subwoofers, no matter how many you have, 1 or 10, and the room work together to create the bass, all together at the same time. That's not this subwoofer does this and this other subwoofer does a different thing, and the room does something to both of them separate. No, all together they create the bass. Okay, so when we in an open concept space like you have, your theater area might be 15 by 15, but the bass is the entire every open door between where the bass starts and anything else. So if you have your front door open, it's the whole world.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, he clearly has an understanding of that, because the subs that he chose to go with are the type that can deal with like 5,000-6,000 cubic feet.
Right.
So he's good on that front.
Yeah. So, even though did he say dual? Did he say dual?
He'll be going dual. Yep.
In an open concept room, oftentimes I do not recommend that you immediately go dual, mostly because setup of duals isn't necessarily going to be the one-stop shop, the easy fix that it is in a rectangular sealed room.
Yeah, it's just harder to predict. In a rectangle, we can predict what they'll do depending on where you place them. In an open concept, it's hard to predict.
So I would do, what Rob said and everything, but I would do what I said. I would set this up and say, this sounds better, or maybe it doesn't. This sounds better, but I want more bass than I'm getting right now. Get the one big sub. Do the subwoofer crawl, which I'm sure you've heard about it. If you've read about Chane, for sure you've read about the subwoofer crawl. So do the subwoofer crawl again. Make sure you've got the perfect place for your sub. And because you'll have to do it again with this new sub, because this new sub does definitely play below 25 hertz.
Oh, yes.
So that's the place you had your old sub isn't necessarily a good place for the new sub.
Yeah.
So, do the subwoofer crawl again, get yourself that sub in the best place that you can possibly play it, and then experience it. And then even I would still do all that before I would buy new speakers, and then then only then would I consider a second sub. But I think Rob's probably right. Room acoustics are probably the biggest culprit of what you're experiencing right now. We can try to help you out with that as much as we can, but it's all down to how many absorptive panels are you willing to put up in this open concept space, because that's what we're going to ask you to do. So let us know what you decide. We can't wait to hear back from you. Kevin has a long, skinny room that was supposed to be a playroom for his kids, but he and his wife ended up watching movies in there more often than not, and Kevin ended up gaming in there too, so it's become an important AV setup. So he's got a flat panel, and it's, oh my God, it's a hallway. It's very thin. It's just big enough.
Little bit of this is optics of the camera lens.
Yeah, I understand that. It's probably big enough for a 3-seater couch with a 2.5-foot walkway on one side.
Pretty much. It's kind of what he's got.
It's on the left wall. There's a walkway on the right. It's way, I mean, maybe not way, but it is really deep behind him. So he's sitting very close to a flat panel display, so his field of view is very good. He's sitting close to his speakers, whatever they may be. But behind him, there's a gajillion space, and it's all glass on the left wall, all white wall everywhere else. So he's got a 65-inch LG B9 OLED, and the stand below cannot be changed. He'd like to get a nice audio setup going, but it has to remain clean looking. That got him thinking in wall speakers. And where?
I know.
Where are you going to put in wall speakers? You'd have to put them all on the right wall, because the rest of them would be firing into the back of the TV, and there's no wall on your left, really. I guess right below that window, but good luck putting the speaker there in the wall. Sorry. That got I'm thinking in-wall speakers and considering the HTD W65s in the front wall, which will go for $75 each. For the subwoofer, the only place you can put one is in the left corner in the small space behind beside the TV stand. He did his own research, and the $915 shipped Rhythmic F8 seems like the best option. It's a dual 8-inch drivers in a tall, narrow, sealed cabinet with a 600-watt amp. The only less expensive sub that will physically fit are way less powerful and can't play nearly as low. Then he was thinking one pair of in-ceiling speakers, but he says that we'd really like to have the precision of Atmos for when he's gaming. Dude, you need a headset. You need some headphones when you're gaming. You don't need the Atmos. You need headphones. All right. It's conceivable that he could do a sound bar setup instead, but he doesn't really want to raise the height of his TV at all if possible, and he is open to on-wall speakers, but he thinks the look of in-walls would go over better. What we think and what we'd recommend. Wow. Yeah. I understand what you're saying about all the things, the words that came out of your mouth and all that, but this is a very, very tight space, especially for in walls.
Yeah, I have one recommendation for you that I feel pretty strongly about that I would be pointing him toward.
All right, what do you got?
Okay, so I want him to get the KEF E301 speakers. Those are the ones that kind of look like round, almost egg-like shapes, but they are like a 4.5-inch woofer in there, so they're not super teeny tiny. They sound better than they have any right to, honestly. Accessories for Less has one of the it's actually a 5.1 package, but if you look at the prices, you're basically getting the teeny tiny little subwoofer, which you can sell because there's no way it contends with this size of room, but you're basically getting the teeny tiny subwoofer and the center speaker for free if you get the E305 5.1 speaker package for $500 from Accessories for Less. Now, I already emailed him directly because Accessories for Less says they're down to their last one in the white finish, and I'm definitely thinking white finish works in this room. But I mean, not only is in-wall speakers in this wall where he's got his TV, I'm like, yep, you literally might not have the space inside those walls because like the right side of that's not like just a hollow in there. That's going to be stacked up. I don't know how the center goes. You pretty much have to have a vertical. They're all going to be behind his TV and like basically firing into the back of his TV. None of that really makes sense. Whereas the KEF E301 speakers, they have an integrated nice wall mount. I don't know if they'd actually come in front of his TV, but they'd be a lot closer than in-wall speakers would. And they're completely like...
He could put them on the cabinet, right?
He could put them right there, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're completely pivotable. Like they basically just have a ball joint that you can pivot in whatever way. So I feel pretty strongly that that's what I would do. I mean, it's the combination of price, sound quality, and looks and ease of mounting them. And if you want a really clean look and you don't want to open up your walls, I mean, Tom will let you know it's not that hard. You have a little hole and you're just going to patch the hole in the wall. You're just dropping speaker wire down from above, perhaps. Through the bay in your wall. But if you don't even want to do that, you can get like Sewell's Ghost Wire, which can be painted. It's self-adhesive and super flat. If you want it to be totally invisible, you just put a little bit of wall plaster over it first, sand, then prime and paint, and it's like completely invisible, blends right into your wall. So there's multiple ways you can do that. Then it's a 5-speaker package. You said you want precision for gaming. Don't do 3.1.2 Atmos. That makes no sense. I mean, all along your right side wall, you can put a speaker anywhere there that's easily wall mountable. The left side where it's all sliding glass doors, some part of that must be stationary. They can't somewhere in between those. It's a little bit hard to tell in the picture, but you could either do whatever is actually like a stationary part of that side, even if it's some ways behind you in a 5-speaker setup, that's okay. Or you could put them above the sliding glass doors and angle them down.
I don't think he needs to. I think there's that window is going to be right next to him. It looks like. So he should be able to put it on that wall right there, or just in that window seal,
pretty much directly to his left. And then just match it on the right. I would definitely go 5.1 because you want the ability in a game to tell that someone is coming from a little bit behind you. You don't just want 3 speakers in front and 2 above you. That's not the precision I would want for gaming. I want 5 speakers around me for sure. So yeah, the KEFs, maybe some ghost wire. I think that's the way to go here.
And what about overheads?
Oh,
Nay or
don't
nay on
bother.
overhead. See?
Don't bother. At
Yeah,
5.1, you're done. I actually like that choice of that rhythmic sub. I think if you're willing to pay that price, it's a wonderful little unit. I mean, it can actually extend down to 19 hertz. It probably won't pressurize that in this size of room, but I don't think that's what he was looking for anyway. And compared to the little teeny tiny Kef sub that comes, it absolutely crushes it, that rhythmic. So that's a nice choice.
Martin on Twitter asked, okay, before we go much further, I just realized I didn't hardwire into the router, and that's why you keep cutting out. That's what the glitching is. So I'll ask the question, and I will say my answer, and then you can start saying your answer, and I'll go get the thing.
Okay.
Martin on Twitter asked, how much space is needed between an acoustically transparent screen and the speakers behind it? I mean, you can mount it to the wall, and the wall can have in-wall speakers. I mean, so
if it's a woven screen, that's
if it's
true.
a woven, it's acoustically transparent. So yeah, I mean,
there are the perforated ones. I mean, most of the ones that we recommend aren't perforated. But the perforated ones, I mean, there's the one that I have mentioned personally, which is IlluneVision's Aurora 4K, which is an ambient light rejecting screen. It's for very specific purposes, but once in a while we get someone who says they absolutely need ambient light rejecting and acoustically transparent, and there's basically only one good choice, and that's IlluneVision's Aurora 4K. That is a perforated screen, and if you're going high-end, you might still be going Stewart film screen, and Stewart's acoustically transparent screens are perforated. And those ones, they recommend having 1 foot of distance from the front of the speaker to the back of the screen. For the perforated, they recommend having 1 foot of distance. But for the woven screens, like we recommend Seymour AV all the time, or IlluneVision's normal woven acoustically transparent, or it could be Elite's, Acoustic Pro UHD, or even Silver Ticket's woven screen that they offer. All of those, 2 inches. They all say you need 2 inches. So not absolutely nothing, but 2 inches is should be manageable for almost anything.
Right. It's almost like basically the grill depth plus whatever the frame you're probably mounting to the wall, and you don't have to really add anything from that.
Yeah.
for those guys. There you go. All right, Joseph. Joseph moved to Vancouver Island 2 years ago, and now he has decided to use the basement bedroom as a dedicated theater. He had thought about using the larger portion of his basement, but this way he can have an enclosed room with full light control, and he's eager to find out what his dual clips SW115 subwoofers can do when they're in the closed volume and air, and he can set up the rest of his speakers to match Dolby's guidelines. His room is 13 by 15 by 8. And he intends to have his seats 9.5 feet from the screen. His budget for all the upgrades are a max of 8,000 Canadian. He intends to continue using his Yamaha RX-A 3050 receiver and Panasonic projector for the time being. He's thinking he'll go with a 120-inch Silver Ticket screen. I thought IlluneVision would be cheaper in your neck of the woods.
No, if he was going acoustically transparent, then IlluneVision would be cheaper than Seymour. But Silver Ticket, like he doesn't need acoustically transparent, so Silver Ticket is definitely still going to be cheaper, even with the cross-border shipping. Make sure that 120 is really what you want. You already have the projector in hand, so you can just project it on your wall, and you can easily tell, okay, that's the size I want. Go ahead and get that size of screen. So 120 might be what you want, but from only 9.5 feet away, that is big. That's a big field of view. So just be sure. That's all. There's totally nothing wrong if that's what you decide you want. You got the projector in hand, so just throw it on the wall for now.
I'm telling you, the last thing anybody wants is to get into a theater, get their theater set up, sit down for the first movie, and go, I got to move my eyes to see the corners of the screen.
Or my entire head, even worse.
I've seen it. It's like sitting too close in the movie theater just drives me absolutely bonkers. So just, be sure. Rob's right. Be sure. So he's 90% settled on getting 3 RBH signature SV61 bookshelf speakers at his front 3. What do we say? Any reason we would strongly point him in a different direction? Nope.
Not really. I mean, those are excellent. Again, tell it like it is speakers. If you don't like the way RBH's signature SV61 bookshelf speakers sound, then something else about your system is what you don't like. Yeah.
So he would really like to experience 100% perfect timbre match, but using more RBH SV61 bookshelf speakers in the surround positions would be a bit expensive, and they're a bit large for his space. He was thinking something closer to the size of the SVS Prime satellites would be nice for surround positions. So what do we recommend as an excellent timbre match, but with smaller size and lower price? anything in the RBH line.
But the thing is,
almost literally.
Right now, RBH's lineup is like the Signature Series. That's kind of all they're selling at the moment. They've drastically reduced, but they do have their on-wall Ultra One speakers, which you want to talk about saving space, and they're less expensive than the SV61s. The RBH Ultra Ones, I'm like, there you go. That's your solution, because you can't save more space than that. They're almost as skinny as Kef's T-Series.
Yeah, the Prime satellites probably wouldn't be a terrible match either.
Wouldn't be a terrible match. No,
I mean, the thing. Let me explain to you my experiences with RBH. All right, I have had an RBH center channel in a theater way back when, right? And I had the front three were all RBH. The surrounds were Axiom, I think, but the front three were RBH, and I would switch out the main left and right speakers with just dozens of other speakers, bookshelves, towers, everything. In all of that, never, with one exception, never did the RBH do anything other than sound fantastic. Even with the timbre going across, never did I notice the RBH sounding significantly different from the other speakers, except for once, and those speakers were garbage. Okay, and that's why, right? It wasn't the RBH, it was the other speakers, and I'm talking significant numbers of speakers that I played with, and all of them were decent speakers, so the RBH played nice with them.
And that was your front three, where you're much more critical of that timbre mismatch. In the surrounds, we're much less able to even detect that. So yeah, I mean, the
if you really like the size of those Prime satellites, the cost isn't that bad.
Yeah,
and they're small. I've got 4 of them in here, and they sound great. They are rear ported. I will warn you on that, but they're rear ported. Mine are sitting right on the wall. I mean,
another option, the same type of logic being applied, Ascend's HTM 200 SEs, and those are a sealed design, so it might be a little bit easier to wall mount without any concern, or put a little shelves on your wall and just hold them that way. But again, a very neutral speaker where the likelihood of you noticing a timbre mismatch as it goes to your surround channels in particular, you could quite easily get away with that. So I mean, 3 really good options there. If you want to stay all RBH, there are the Ultra Ones as an option. You already know the Prime satellite size-wise, and we'll tell you the sound quality is close enough, and Ascend's HTM 200 SEs, those will also work all just fine.
So for his in-ceiling speakers, he's strongly leaning towards the RBH VA615Ls. He likes that they have back cans available and would want to use those. He also thinks the built-in 15-degree angle will be beneficial for aiming the ceiling speakers towards the seats. He really wants to try and follow Dolby's speaker placement as closely as possible, and 45-degree elevation angles will put his ceiling speakers about 4.5 feet in front and behind. The low price of monoprice's in-ceiling speakers and plastic back enclosures has him wondering if he should save the money and go that route instead. So what are our thoughts in regards to the overhead speakers? Well, if you really want to follow Dolby's suggestions, you will not buy speakers that are aimed. That's correct. They will go straight down. They'll just be the normal in-ceiling speakers for Atmos are that the Atmos was designed with down firing in-ceiling speakers at 45-degree angles in front and behind you, not firing at you 45 degrees. In fact, I would recommend, if these were the only 2 options, I would say go monoprice. Honestly. But, I mean, in RBH's lineup, just drop the L off of the model number. You get the VA615s, not the L. Yeah. I'm not sure why L is the angled one. I'm not sure what the L stands for, but just drop the L, the VA615s. They just fire 45-degree angle on it, man. I guess they just fire straight down, and that's what you want. So, let's see. He's saying like this might be the last theater he builds. This is where he plans to stay for quite a while. The RBHs aren't ridiculously overpriced. We actually do have, I think Commercial Electronics does sell them in Vancouver. You'd have to come to the mainland, but Ascend also has in-ceiling speakers, right? No, Ascend doesn't have any in-ceilings. No, they don't. Aperion does, but Aperion doesn't have any sort of their own back cans, whereas RBH has actually 2 different back can options, the foam-based ones and the fire-retardant metal back can ones. So I'm almost inclined to just say go ahead and get the RBHs. I mean, it is a little bit more money up front, but there will be never a doubt in your mind
It'll never cross your mind. In time, you'll be like, look, they're fantastic. I don't regret this purchase at all. Just get the ones that fire straight down. That's all I would tell you to do differently here.
He was looking to go with GIC for absorption and diffusion panels, but cross-border shipping is more problematic these days. Any recommendations on the acoustic treatment front for purchasing in Canada? I don't know. Come on, Canadian guy, tell me.
There's a place called Acoustic Panels Canada, and they sell. You won't believe this.
No,
acoustic
tell
panels
me, Rob.
in Canada.
No, don't leave me in suspense.
You'd never guess it from their name. But,
is it projectors?
But
it's projectors.
That's what they sell. Now, the thing is, all the ones that are just listed on their website that you would just add to a cart and order through their website, they're all the 2 inches of insulation style. That it's totally standard. But you can call them, and they can make you custom panels of basically any size and thickness that you please. So if you want some 4-inch or 6-inch thick bass traps instead, just give them a call. You can't just put it in a cart and order it that easily, but it's as simple as a phone call. So Acoustic Panels Canada, and they'll get you covered. They even do printed panels now. They didn't used to. Now they do.
Joe says, Trinnov posted a webinar, and at one point they went over the various overhead speaker positions. Joe has heard us saying recently that labeling 4 overheads as front heights and rear heights is the best way to go for maximum compatibility. But Trinnov's advice seem to contradict that. They talked about how some content is mixed with the overhead positions, basically mimicking channel-based mixing, so it's important to label the overhead speakers to match their real physical locations. Any thoughts? Yeah, when you sell a $50,000 processor that can do like 23 stupid speakers, yeah, you label them exactly where they are. But when you're going for maximum compatibility with off-the-shelf AV receivers, front heights and rear heights is your jam, baby.
Yeah, there was so I mean, they were talking about how they can do the full 10 overhead speakers, which that's the only one that can, is the Trinnov Altitude, that can do the full complement of 10 overhead speakers in a Dolby Atmos setup. So yeah, they were talking about, like I've mentioned before, Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman is one where they picked 4 locations, 45-degree elevation angles, 30-degree left and right azimuth spreads in front and behind, and that was where they put sounds. And they used channel-like mixing, where if they wanted to move something left to right or front to back, they just did it by turning up the volume on one side of the speaker,
right.
like you would with channels. That's how they mixed it, unfortunately. The thing is, any mixes that have been done that way have done it at the 45-degree elevation angles. That's what they've chosen. And if you label 4 overhead speakers as front heights and rear heights, those will still track, because front heights and rear heights will recognize any sounds that are anywhere between 30 and 45-degree elevation angles. That is totally acceptable within Dolby's spec. So anything that was hard mixed at 45 will still play perfectly out of front height and rear height speakers. Now, in Trinnov's defense, when they say front heights and rear heights, they are talking about the recommended 30-degree elevation angle and nothing but. Because for their processors, if you want speakers at 45 degrees, well, they are top fronts and top rears, because you do 30 and 45, and you don't have to change because you can do all 10 with their processor, and that's unique to them. So they're not wrong, but it is also not necessary. 45-degree elevation angles, perfectly fine to call them heights.
It's April, right? It's not May yet?
It is April. Middle of April.
Jeez. Just like absolutely freaked out because I thought it was May. All of a sudden, it was like my wife's birthday would be next week, and I'd be in trouble.
Oh, man.
All right. Will on Facebook. At the moment, Will and his wife have a TiVo Bolt plugged into a TCL TV, and they can just use the TiVo remote. The TV would turn on, and they can control the volume with just the one remote. Will's wife wants the control to remain that simple, but Will would like to add a sound bar to improve the audio, and he's eyeing the HEOS bar that Tom's parents got recently. So can all that work using just the TiVo remote to control all 3 devices? Will he need to use ARC or audio return channel? He's got a TiVo. He can plug it into the sound bar.
Yep.
And the sound bar up to the TV.
Yep.
And the HEOS can learn all the controls of your TiVo.
That's right.
And will go on and off, and the volume control will be from there.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, you can do that.
It should.
without
It
having
should
to use
absolutely work.
ARC. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't even have to use HDMI CEC either. You can bypass all of that because it can literally use the remote.
I can learn the volume commands.
It can use the volume. It can learn the volume commands. And there's an app that you can set up on your phone.
Right.
So that when you go over there, you can make sure everything's working properly.
Yeah.
But yes, you could do
so
that.
you would have to do a little bit of rewiring. You would want to plug the TiVo into the HEOS bar and then plug the HEOS bar into the TV. Whereas right now the TiVo is connected directly to the TV. So a little bit of rewiring, but other than that, should absolutely work. Now, if you want the single press of a power button to turn on all three devices, that would be HDMI CEC. And you can do that because your TCL definitely has HDMI CEC. The HEOS bar has CEC. And the TiVo does have CEC. Of course, they've branded it Wake with TiVo because you got to brand it something. But it is in there. It's called Wake with TiVo if you were uncertain if it actually had HDMI CEC. So one way or the other, this is absolutely doable. And pretty straightforward.
Vamp for a second because my stupid computer's frozen.
Oh, dear. All right. Well, I can still hear you, thankfully. So hopefully it'll come back to life. Damien here, I'll just go on to his question. Straight up now, Damien wants to ask a question. Does he actually need back cans for his in-ceiling Atmos speakers? He'll be installing them in his drop tile ceiling in his basement, so he always assumed he would want to have back cans mostly for not having sound leaking upstairs. But if he didn't have to have back cans, it would open up more options for which in-ceiling speakers he could use. So it's kind of...
you don't have to, but I would... So your speakers now become dipole, okay? So you'd have
a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you'd have the back can on them would help contain the backwards sound basically. The fact that there's a acoustic drop tile ceiling between you and the back of that speaker would be some measure of protection from that, but the back can would definitely help with it.
And then you could have insulation in all your ceiling joists because this is basement to first floor. It's not going into the attic. So in North America, fire safety wise, we don't normally. Some areas you might actually want to check with building code to make sure. But I wanted to mention there is an option because over in the UK and Europe, their fire safety code is stricter. And they've mandated that any ceiling, doesn't matter which floor, if you're putting a hole in that ceiling for a can light or an in-ceiling speaker, you must have some kind of back enclosure for fire safety purposes. So over there, they call them fire hoods instead of back cans. That's the thing you would search for. But there is a company called Live Audio that ships to the US, and it's a pretty reasonable price. They're like $50. So after the shipping, it is like, I don't know, about $40-$50 of shipping. So it's about $250 all in to get 4 of these. And I mean, they're basically just fire retardant fabric with insulation inside. It's nothing particularly amazing or fancy.
They look like those things that in the movies and old TV shows where people got whiplash and they would wear a thing around their neck. Right. It looks like that, except it's got a top to it, and you just wrap it around your speaker.
And the ones they sell, they say work for either...
Or a Gabor hat. That's what it looks like.
It's either a 6.5-inch or an 8-inch. You can actually just trim the fabric to fit the exact circumference of the speakers that you're putting them around. So, I mean, if you're really concerned about it, something like that is all you need. They claim that it's a little bit frequency dependent, but they can attenuate the sound by about 10 decibels. Which is, enough to muffle it a little bit, and then combine that with your regular insulation inside your ceiling, and it should be reasonably decent. And it is the fire safety brick. That's sort of the main thing. So that's an option. You can do it that way. It's a little bit hard to still find the what are those things? What's the name of those? I'm forgetting them now. The vinyl ones that you could sort of roll up and put them in the ceiling and. Why am I forgetting the name now?
He's literally derping on this podcast.
It's the name of the stuff you put on the bed liner of your pickup truck.
Rhino something?
No, it starts with a D. I'm totally blanking on it now. Anyway, they don't make them they discontinued them, so they're hard to find anyway. But yeah, these are cheaper. So yeah, you might check out Live Audio. It might give you the options you're looking for.
Plus, your speaker still looks so fabulous, darling.
That's right.
So he's trying to maximize his materials for building his DIY bass traps. The Owens Corning 703 that he has on hand is 3 inches thick, and as mentioned previously, he can't straddle the corners of his room due to where speakers and other items are placed. So should he just double up on the insulation to make a 6-inch thick insulation with maybe a 1-inch air gap? Those would then go on flat on his walls, or should he do something else to maximize the uses of what he has on hand? So if you want something that's got the effectiveness of 6 inches of absorption, you can use a 3-inch panel with a 3-inch air gap.
You could.
Gives you about the same amount of thickness. So would I want a 7-inch off my wall thing with 6 inches of insulation and 1 inch of air gap? Or would I want more panels that are 3 inches with a 3-inch air gap coming off my wall? I would take option B.
Yeah, you'll be able to make more of them with the material you have on hand. And since they're going flat on your walls, like you'll never see the air gap. That's not going to be any type of concern. Yeah, that's absolutely the way to go. It's the most efficient use of the material you have on hand, and you don't even really have to do anything particularly special besides build a frame that is deeper than the insulation that you put into that frame. That's not so hard.
That's right. Andrew on Facebook. Andrew isn't watching any 4K or HDR content at the moment, only 1080p SDR. So would an OLED be worth it in his case? He can afford a 65-inch, but the same amount of money could buy an even larger LCD, what do we think? Well, all of them are going to be 4K and HDR. It doesn't make any difference.
Pretty much, but it's OLED versus LCD is the real question. And if he isn't going to be watching HDR... Is the OLED going to be worth it for standard dynamic range?
Let me explain to you for exactly how long you will not be watching HDR after you get your OLED.
Yeah, you're going to have like Disney Plus or Netflix or something. Like
you are going to come home from the store with your new OLED and a disc. I guarantee it. You're going, I don't have a player. You will. Yeah.
Disney Plus is kind of like one of the cheapest ways to get yourself some 4K HDR content with movies you very well might enjoy watching in 4K HDR. They got a big selection, so chances are. But even if all you ever watch on your new TV is 1080p SDR, if 65 inches is large enough for you, there's nothing subtle, in my opinion, about how good OLEDs look. I don't even think you have to have them side by side to appreciate it. Like when you see how black is on an OLED, and standard dynamic range still has black, and sometimes still has a black pixel right beside a lit pixel, and there is no haloing. It is perfect contrast. It's totally worth it to get an OLED, in my opinion, Andrew. As long as 65 inches is big enough. If you're like, I'm sitting 9 or 10 feet away, well, then you're going to want the bigger. You want to try and get an 85-inch if you could, right? And you're not going to be able to afford that in an OLED. So size does matter depending on your seating distance. But if 65 inches is big enough, get the OLED for sure. It is. You will not regret it.
Well, okay. He hasn't given us enough information. I mean, we're making assumptions based on what we know to be true about the performance of these things. He very well may be the type of person who really honestly doesn't see a huge difference and doesn't notice a huge difference. All he really cares about is the size of the screen. In which case, it would be totally fine for you to get the bigger screen. I mean, that would, for the cheaper price. But the reality is, I've got 4K discs here. I've had them for a while. I've got a 4K player. I've had it for a while. And I've got a 1080p source. I mean, a projector.
Yeah.
So, eventually I will have a 4K HDR display. I know I will. I will almost certainly have to go from my projector to a direct view because the HDMI cable that's in the wall is not going to be sufficient. But, I mean, yes, you can make a case on both sides of this, but I think objectively the OLED is better than any LCD.
It is.
And if the 65 is big enough, then, or if you can just move your chair closer, well, then I think you're okay. David found a strange looking old Yamaha speaker driver hiding in the warehouse. Any idea what it was from? So this looks like a kind of kidney bean, or maybe a lowercase b style, super like 70s stylized lowercase b, and there's like little voice coil thingy on the back, and it's plastic. It looks like it's a big plastic driver thingy. It's huge.
It is big.
I mean, it looks like it's like 3 feet tall, maybe taller than that. I don't know. It's massive, and it's from Yamaha.
It is.
So, what's your guess?
Yeah, well, thankfully it had a model number on the back of it. Says
it sure does.
It's a little rubbed off, but it could make it out as the JA6001. And looking that up, they were known as the elephant ear drivers. That's what they were affectionately called. And they came from something that was called Yamaha's Electone bass guitar amp circa 1970. So good call on the looking like a 70s thing, because that's exactly what they were. And it was from a bass guitar amp. That's what it was.
There you go. Bass guitar amp. Who wouldn't knew? How long have we been going? Hour and a half. We got plenty of time. Joe, last week we talked about the stutter Joe was seeing during slow pans and scrolling credits on his Sony A9G OLED TV. So we said that was all about 24 frames per second content, and he had a set of sources to output 24p instead of 60p. So he did that, but he can still see some stutter. He did more research on his own, and several people are saying there's just some jerky-looking movement inherent to film, and it's particularly noticeable on OLEDs because OLEDs have instantaneous response times, so they don't blur the movement at all. And some people just notice it more. So is that the case, or is he just always going to notice some stuttering in pans and scrolling now, or is there anything he can do to solve the issue without turning up Sony's motion flow enough that it introduces odd effects and weird-looking motion of its own? I don't know that this makes any sense of what people are saying about OLEDs.
Well, I mean, there is such a thing as film camera judder. That is a real thing where, because if you were actually only exposing film 24 times a second, that is pretty low. That's a pretty low frame rate. It means there is blur inherent in the exposure of the photograph being taken itself. And that does have, I mean, we've kind of gotten used to it as the quote-unquote filmic look.
Right.
But now you are perhaps seeing it as unadulterated as possible. There's a little bit more than just it being instantaneous response time of the OLED. It's that OLED is a combination of virtually instantaneous response of the pixels, but then also sample and hold. So it means that when an image is thrown up on screen, it shows up nigh instantaneously, faster than an LCD panel can actually show you the image, but then it holds the image there until the next image. And then when the next image comes up, it flashes it again.
And that's been the ongoing issue with these technologies as compared to CRTs even, and plasmas.
Yeah.
It's plasma that used to talk about 600 hertz refresh rate.
DLP too, actually.
Yeah. So what that means is that it flashes the image, and then the image goes away, and then however long it takes later, it flashes the next image. So
and it was actually
in between
a series of flashes to build up to the image. In the case of plasma and DLP, it's actually flashing hundreds of times per frame to build the image, but there's like little flashes that build up to it.
Right. So the idea here is that your brain is very, very good at taking these individual images and putting them together with the black space that's in between, sort of, and putting them together into motion. They're very, very, and you've always seen these things on Facebook or whatever, optical illusions. You're like, look at this one, and you'll see one thing. Look at another thing, you'll see something else. And why are you doing that? Because your brain is hardwired. Is to put together motion. Because we don't see continuous light coming in. We see a sample. Our eyes take a sample and send that to our brain, and our brain interprets those different flashes that we're getting as motion. So it's very good at doing that. But when you sample and hold, there's long articles about this, about LCD and the problem with LCDs versus plasmas, because we should talk about it all the time back then, is that when you sample and hold, you hold that up there, you just can't switch fast enough for our brain to say, okay, this is a different thing, and have it make that look like motion to our brain.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
it's each image is up there for almost a full 24th of a second, and our eyes notice more changes than only 24 times a second. So it's inherent to the signal in the image itself. It's not really the fault of the display, like it's doing something
but I don't think that's
wrong.
what's happening here.
Really?
No, I think what's happening here is that it's been very concretely pointed out to him that Judder can exist in this, and now he's extremely sensitive to it. So yes, it is the technology.
Some people do just notice it more. I mean, even without pointing it out to them, some people just notice it more, and it bothers them more. Yeah.
When I go and I do, I'm doing a lot of video reviews, and I'm, going through and having to watch all the different test patterns and stuff like that, I get extremely sensitive to moire and stair stepping and all these other artifacts and the judder that happens with scrolling text and that sort of stuff. I get extremely sensitive to it. But then over time, I sort of kind of relax and I stop noticing it as much. And then, I'll get a real bad instance of it, and then they'll come back and start bothering me again. I think that eventually it won't bother him as much. I think now that he's had this experience, it's, he's going to be much more sensitive to it than maybe a lot of other people are. Because I think a lot of people, like, when they see that, it's like, oh, that's not right. And their brain's just like, well, whatever, don't worry about that. And they go on with their lives. I mean, honestly, that's what when I'm watching stuff with my wife, I'm like, the lip sync is off. She's like, whatever. I wasn't even paying attention. Like, how are you not paying attention to the lips moving? That's like the whole thing. People are talking. Yeah, I was listening. Like, so, I mean, I think he's now been tuned into it, and it's going to take him a little while to get desensitized again. So
now there is,
I don't know there's a solution.
There is potentially one thing you could try, because I mean, hey, you've got the TV and this is just a setting in the menu, so give it a try. There is a setting in the Sony A9G called clearness, and what that adjusts is black frame insertion. Since the Sony TV is actually refreshing its screen 120 times per second. So if you're showing 24 frames per second content, it's showing each frame 5 times, but you have the option of inserting black frames. So you might show each frame 3 times and then have 2 black frames in between each of those repetitions. The issue there is that if you're sensitive enough to notice filmic judder, that's just inherent to something being at 24 frames a second, you will probably notice a bit of flicker now, which is probably worse. Because normally when you turn on black...
It's worth giving it a shot, though.
It's because it's just a setting in the menu, so why not turn it on and see? Because having those black frames inserted might be enough to clear up that little bit of motion for you. The other thing you can do is you could turn motion flow on, but to its very lowest setting. Now, to me, even that is still enough to get a hint of the soap opera effect, which I hate more than filmic judder. It compromises all around. But if filmic judder bothers you more than just a hint of soap opera effect, then having motion flow on its lowest setting might be something worth trying. So play with the clearness and the motion flow and see if you can find a balance that's more pleasing to your eyes.
All right, Ben and Francis on Facebook. When Ben ran Audyssey on his Denon X3500H for the first time, it said different crossover frequencies for his fronts, centers, and surrounds. 60 hertz for the fronts, 40 hertz for the center, and 90 hertz for the surrounds. He knows we typically say to raise anything that was up below 80 to 80, leave anything that was above 80 by Audyssey, leave it alone. But there is an option to have individual crossovers or one global crossover frequency. How does the Denon base management handle those two options differently? And since the highest crossover that Audyssey set was 90 hertz, should he just take that and use it as a single global crossover frequency for all of his speakers? Should we keep reading here?
Sure, because they're related. They're both basically the same question.
Francis had a similar question, as he has now set up his KEF Q series speakers and run Audyssey a few times, and is consistently sending his fronts and center to 40 and his surrounds to 60. He's got dual PB-2000s handling the bass, so she just set all of his speakers to 80 for the crossover. I answered that one on Facebook and said yes.
Yeah, so in Francis's case, it's a little bit easier. All of his speakers were set lower than 80, so we would just say raise them all to 80 and you're done for Francis's case. But it's a slightly different in Ben's case because most of his speakers were set lower than 80. 180, we would tell you to just raise it to 80 in all likelihood. But his surrounds were set by Audyssey to 90 hertz. So does he raise them all of his speakers to 90 so that he has one global, or does he leave the surrounds at 90 and have everything else at 80?
So I'll tell you what I did, because I had the same experience, because I have the Ultra bookshelf speakers with the Ultra Center. The Ultra Center is bigger, therefore it plays lower and louder, and it's set lower, just like yours is, probably 40, and I think the fronts were probably set to 60.
Yep.
And I set all three of those to 80, and then whatever the surrounds were set, I let them at.
Okay.
And that's the way I did it, and I did it individually. Should you set everything to 8 or to 90 because the highest thing you had was 90? In my mind, no. I don't see any reason to do that. If you have individual crossovers, you can use them, so you might as well. Is there a reason to use them, a global crossover? I mean, if it were me, I'd still set the global crossover to 80 because those surrounds are probably just fine.
They'll probably be fine. The likelihood that you would notice it, yes, very low likelihood.
Very low. Yeah, so I would set it all to 80 if you wanted to do it that way. But since you have individual crossovers, just do what we normally recommend. Set everything to 80 except things that are higher, and let that be set by itself.
Yeah, I mean, the Denon's bass management, it's not much of an issue because each of your speaker channels, all of them, even the overhead speaker channels that you have, they are all, in terms of what the signal being sent to the AV receiver, they're full range signals. They go all the way down to 20 hertz or even lower potentially, but they all go all the way down to 20 hertz in those speaker channels as far as the signal is concerned. The Denon simply takes that, and wherever you have set the crossover frequency for whatever given pair of speakers, it says, well, I just know that I'm going to start rolling off a little ways above the crossover that you've picked. And all of that bass that I'm rolling off, I'm going to divert and send out of the subwoofer output instead. And so you can do that for the speakers individually because they're each treated as separate channels. So there's no like confusion going on in the bass management of some of these are rolling off higher than others. It's on a channel by channel basis. There's really no conflict or any problem going on there. My super anal approach to bass management of speakers is I'm willing to go a little bit more complex, which is I will actually play a bass sweep out of each speaker individually, and I'll listen to that bass sweep in each of my 3 seats. And as soon as I can detect that the bass sweep is starting to sound non-uniform, that's really all I care about. I sit in my left seat and I can notice at 60 hertz, it starts to have a little bit of a dip. But if I move to my middle seat at 60 hertz, there's a bit of a hump. I go, well, then I better have my crossover well above 60 hertz because I'm getting non-uniformity at 60 hertz.
Right.
In my particular case, my front, left, and right speakers, I could let them play all the way down to 60 hertz without any problem. For whatever reason, that works out in my room. I get uniformity from my front, left, and right speakers all the way down to 60 hertz, but for my center speaker, it starts to become non-uniform right about 80, 85. So I want to set its crossover at like 90 or 100. So I take that extra approach because Audyssey is still going to detect that my center speaker can play down to 40 as far as what the speaker can do. But my own more thorough testing with individual bass test tones, bass sweeps, lets me know that for uniformity across all of my seats, I actually want to set it higher. So you could, if you want to be like me, go that far, but setting everything at 80 is pretty darn safe.
So he asked that mid-range compensation filter option in the Audyssey editor app on or off. Can we explain that one more time? I will once again say I have had it both on and off, and I can honestly say with 100% certainty I could not tell you if it was on or off at any point. It looks a lot more noticeable in the visual graph than it actually. It's basically a notch. It's just a little notch. You explained why they did that, but I don't really remember what it is.
It was because Audyssey's been around for a while. It's a pretty old program as far as software goes these days. And when they were testing a lot of speakers in the early days, they noticed a lot of speakers didn't have the best crossovers designed between the tweeters and the mid-range driver, or the tweeter and the woofer if it's a two-way speaker. They found a lot of them were using really shallow slopes, because it's cheaper. If you're building a crossover, having a shallow slope is fewer components. It's cheaper and easier to use. And they were just noticing that they were getting these, comb filtering and cancellation between the mid-range mid-range driver and the tweeter in a lot of speakers that they measure. They're like, well, if we just put in a notch filter right around 2 or 2.5 kilohertz, it basically gets rid of that one issue in a ton of speakers. And for the speakers that are well designed, you don't really notice it because they already had steep filters. So it's just like further steepening it at where the crossover for most tweeters is. So it's like, yeah, honestly, go ahead and flick it on and off. You're going to be like Tom and not be able to tell the difference anyway. So it's almost neither here nor there.
Yeah. I said at the beginning, at some point in this podcast, I thought it was at the beginning, that I needed to run Audyssey again, and that's why. Right. Because I ran it from the receiver,
yes.
but I didn't run it from the app.
Yeah.
So I need to run it from the app so that I can turn off that stupid notch filter and
and have
whatever.
a go.
I really don't care. I just, as somebody who loves this hobby as much as I do, and I really, really, really do, but there's so many things that people really get passionate about in this hobby, or really worry about in this hobby, that I'm like, it's so not audible. You're not going to see it. You're not going to hear it. You're not going to feel it. You're not going to taste it. It's going to have the only place that this matters is in between your ears. That's the only place that this matters. And this is one of them. This is why I cannot bring, with literally nothing to do all day, practically. I mean, I have tons of things to do, but I can't go to work. I can't go out. I cannot find that motivation to run Audyssey again just so I could turn off that stupid notch filter, because I know it's not going to make any difference. But hey, man, you do you. Ben has a 20 amp outlet where we'd like to plug in this gear. We recommend the APC J-type battery backup. Those are all 15 amp units. Is it okay to plug an APC J-type into a 20 amp outlet, or is there a 20 amp power conditioner we would recommend instead? I think it's okay to plug it in, right? I mean, it's just extra power available that it can or can't use.
You will basically probably never trip your breaker, your 20 amp breaker. You'll probably never trip it, but it's totally fine to plug a 15 amp J-type into a 20 amp outlet. Power is drawn, not pushed, so you're absolutely fine to do that.
So, I mean, at some point, that outlet where they may have had a bunch of different stuff plugged in there, like in my kitchen in my house in Jacksonville, like we could run the microwave. So there was the microwave, the toaster oven, and one more thing in the kitchen, and I could run 2 of them. But if I ran all 3 of them, it would trip the breaker every single time. So I had an electrician come out, and he checked the wires, and for $100 said, "Yeah, this is safe," and put a 20
amp outlet there, and a breaker.
And that was it. I mean, at the breaker, and that was it, just so I wouldn't keep tripping it.
Yep.
And that's all it is. So you just have more power available.
The 20 amp outlets, they have both the vertical and the little horizontal. It's so physically you can plug in a 15 amp, and it's totally fine to do so.
Yeah. Nick says, thanks for all the help last episode regarding his placement theater build. We brought up his acoustic panel placement, which had offset absorption and diffusion panels in the drawings he provided last week, and we said we're not in favor of that method, so we suggest foregoing most of the diffusion only panels and replacing them with absorption panels and scatter plates instead. Yes. Nick has heard us mention that the 30% of the total surface area covered in absorption, rule of thumb before, so he wanted to clarify that his previous drawings didn't show the ceiling panels and the tri-trap corner base traps that he intends to install. The room will be fully carpeted. So we think even more absorption potentially with scatter plates is still the way to go. I think what we said is get rid of the diffusion and put scatter plates on top of your absorption.
Yeah, I mean, I basically was saying, like, because some of the panels that he has in his drawing are diffusion only.
Right.
And I was like, it's fine to have panels everywhere that you've proposed placing panels, but just have them be absorption panels with a diffusion scatter plate on top of it, because you can basically, in a room this size, you can pretty much never have too much absorption. It's really hard, even with the 30% rule that we're talking about. Now, if more than 30% of your surfaces are covered with nothing but absorption, then you can start to get that this room sounds kind of dead. But what we're talking about is putting diffusion on top of even more absorption. The even more absorption is only going to help you more and more in the lower mid-range and bass. The more absorption you have, the more you're going to be helped out there. And actually, to that end, what I think would be helpful is, I've talked before about Real Trap's YouTube video, where they show how they treated a small mixing room. And what's great is they have audio so that you can hear treatments versus no treatments, but they also have audio where you can hear treatments, so no treatments, absorption only, and then the combo of absorption and diffusion. And something to pay attention to is that their diffusion panels are combo absorption diffusion panels. They aren't diffusion only, because again, they explain you can basically never have too much absorption in a small room. So that's really all. I would still recommend that. So everywhere that he's got these diffusion only panels, I'm like totally fine with you having diffusion there. Just have it be a scatter plate on top of another absorption panel. That's all. The ceiling ones, diffusion only, I'm totally fine with that, because otherwise it just gets too thick and unwieldy.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I think his question is this going to be too much? And what Rob is saying is that it's almost impossible for it to be too much. I'm going to say that I have been in the room where I've actively tried to make it be too much. Mm-hmm. Okay. In my office in my house in Jacksonville, I had like, in a 10 by 11 foot room, I had like 20 or 30 panel, 4-inch thick, 2 foot by 4 foot, 4-inch thick panels in that room. I had them on the
absorption only.
Absorption only all over the place. It was too much. It was too much. But I worked in there every day and I thought it was great. I had no problems with it. It was quiet. It was,
echo free.
Completely echo free, and I loved it. It was much like putting on headphones. Mm-hmm. So if you think about putting on headphones, not playing anything through them, but like sealed back, over ear headphones, putting those on, that's what it was like. When you first put them on, you're like, ooh, this sounds weird, and then a couple of seconds later, you're like, yeah, I kind of like it.
But what I would say is, in Tom's room that he just described, it's like it probably is a little too dead in the high treble, but instead of removing absorption, I would just have scatter plates over some of the existing absorption, and that'll bring back some of that liveliness to the treble.
And as much as you're looking at your all these panels on your walls and stuff like that, and the ones in your ceiling and blah blah blah, the reality is when you get into this room, you're going to look around and you're going to realize very quickly you're nowhere near 30%.
Actually, yeah, because
you're not even
2 foot by 4 foot panels, they don't cover all of the wall, floor to ceiling. So
yeah, you're looking at it from the top view, and you're seeing this panel going from floor to ceiling, and with only a little gap between each panel. The reality is there's more wall than there is panel on that wall, even if you've got each one of those as an absorption panel and half of them with diffusion on top of them as well.
Yeah.
So you're nowhere near that. Now, if you do decide to go floor to ceiling with this thing and everything else, I mean, you've got 6 walls, right?
Yep.
You've got 6 walls, and if you did this and you put your right wall and your left wall, floor to ceiling absorption with half of it having diffusion on it, and then you have your carpet on your floor, your tri-traps in your corner, and a couple of things on top of on your ceiling there, I would still say you're not that third yet, because that carpet doesn't absorb that much. Okay, the carpet's not nearly good enough.
Only the very high frequencies.
Yeah. So I still think you would be below the 30% threshold. So don't worry about that. He says, do we have any suggestion for some sort of recessed wall plate that could go behind a flush-mounted TV and allow for a power cable, 2 in-wall HDMI cables, and an in-wall optical cable, all to be connected? Sanus has a solution, but it's expensive, if I remember correctly.
And because of that, Monoprice. Monoprice has a really simple... It's a recessed plate. It actually just has dog ears on the back, so you don't even need like a full electrical box, because the electrical part of it, where the outlets are, that has its own backer already built into it. Now, you're going to say, okay, well, that just put a hole into my wall, because where your HDMI cables and optical cable would go is just an opening. But what you would do is put one of those putty pads on the back. So you'd run your cable in there and then seal it up with a putty pad so that you don't just have an actual open cavity into your wall. And that's about it. What is it, $25? Not too bad.
Yeah, the Sanus one's like 50 or something.
Yeah.
So I just looked it up real quick. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little more expensive. Lee, we told Lee that the main thing he should buy to improve his system is a second subwoofer. He already owns a SVS PB-2000, and SVS has a sale on PB-2000 subs, right? Is this not our Lee? This is a different Lee?
This is a different Lee. This is not Overstreet. differently.
But it's also an O. That's what
I know. Well, other people. There are other O last names.
We're not. I'm sorry. You people have to get together and use a middle initial or something. You're killing me. SVS is selling PB-2000 subs right now. Should you snag one of those, or would it be worth it to get the new PB-2000 Pro model? Any possible downsides to using a 2000 and a 2000 Pro together? First of all, you should grab the 2000. It's fine.
Cheaper. It matches exactly what you already have. Yes.
I think the chances of you noticing a difference between the Pro and the not Pro are 0.00.
Well, if you're using the app on one and not the other, that you would notice. But performance-wise,
performance-wise, you're not going to notice any difference.
Not terribly likely. But honestly, they got a sale on PB-2000s that completely 100% match the one you already have. Save the money, grab one of those.
So if he makes his own DIY corner bass traps, would it be okay to make them 12 inches wide instead of the usual 24 inches wide? And I don't care. You make them as wide as you want to make them. We're not like the bass trap police. I don't care.
Yes, they do not have to be standard size. I mean, I get if you could put not straddling the corner, but a 12-inch wide one that is flat on your front wall, 12-inch wide one that is flat on your side wall. That's pretty decent coverage. If it's at least 4.5 or so inches thick, that's totally fine. Doesn't have to straddle the corner, and
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple of tri-traps in here, which are holdovers, and they're falling apart, I swear. I love them, but they've been literally around the world. They have flown from Florida to Australia and back. Thank you very much. They are well traveled, but they're falling apart. And then I've got a bunch of panels in here that are on the wall that I will made myself, and they're all janky as heck, but the lights are off. You can't see them anyway. Shut up. Some of them are 4 inches thick. Some of them are, 2 inches, maybe a little bit more than 2 inches thick. They're all covered in black. They're all square or rectangular, and I kind of built them based on what I had on hand and what I thought I could hang them. So it's a matter of, yes, it would be great if we could all have chunk corner traps in all four of, and then midpoint of the side walls we have our subwoofers, and then we have our first reflection points, and we'd have diffusion on the ceiling, and every wall nearly covered with absorption, super thick carpet, and a solid core door with an airlock, and nothing coupled to anything else. Like we'd all be floating in space as we were watching these things. And every wall, ceiling, and floor piece of furniture, and all our clothes, plus wearing blackface, because apparently that's gonna happen. Or maybe we could just pull our hoodie really tight, like Pete Davidson, every stupid thing he does for Saturday Night Live. There we all are. Yes, that would be perfect. But this is not perfect. This is reality, and we'll just deal with what we got. So, yeah. Let's cut it there, I think. We've got
man.
How many more questions do we have?
10.
Oh. I mean, that's 2 hours, Rob. I mean, it's 2 hours.
We can fly through Infinite Garys. What do you say?
Infinite Gary. There's no flying through Infinite Gary. There's never been a flying through Infinite. He's a no-fly zone. Infinite no-fly zone. His new name.
Yep.
All right, we'll do Infinite Gary, then I got to go to bed.
Okay.
So we talked a bit about Samsung's plans to shut down their LCD manufacturing plants and convert them to manufacturing QD-OLED displays. Gary started reading up in QD-OLED, and the big advancement seems to be mostly about moving the quantum dot layer from the backlight position to the very front of the screen, so that the quantum dots are directly emitting light without any other layers between the quantum dots in our eyes. So this quantum dot filter that would go on the very front of the screen, is it a big improvement over current displays, or is it just a slight improvement, and will it only work with the quantum dot filter over OLED, or could that quantum dot filter be used over other types of display technology? What is he talking about?
Well, because unfortunately, with the branding that Samsung does, calling QLEDs, that sort of leads people astray as to what is actually producing the image that we're looking at, right? So it's important to know that with current QLED displays, they are LCD TVs. Samsung is basically trying to do everything they can in their marketing to distract you from the fact that they are still an LCD TV. The thing that is modulating the light and the thing that is actually creating the color is still an LCD filter. That's what's doing it. And all they've changed is the backlight, right? We used to have fluorescent backlights. Now, then we went to LED backlights, and now they've gone to blue LEDs that then shine through a layer of red and green quantum dots to create a white backlight, and that gets modulated and filtered by an LCD panel. So the idea of quantum dot OLED is that you have nothing but blue OLEDs. That's all it is, just blue OLEDs. And then they will shine through. One just lets the blue light through. That's your blue subpixels. But then you have green and red quantum dots on the front of the screen, and they actually directly emit the light out into the room and to your eyes. Now, the advantage there is that you get wide viewing angles. That light is spreading evenly in every direction. So you get wide viewing angles, and it should allow it to be brighter as well, because there's nothing modulating the light of the quantum dots. There's no filters in front of them anymore. The only thing modulating the light is turning the blue OLEDs behind them on and off. So you get perfect black levels, brighter peak light output, and wide viewing angles. Now, could you use something different from a blue OLED to produce the initial light? Well, yeah, they're already working on that. They've dubbed it QNED, which is a little bit misleading because it's a gallium nitride nanorod. Now, gallium nitride is what we use to make blue LEDs anyway. So anytime you see a blue LED or a blue micro LED or a blue mini LED, that's a gallium nitride LED. Well, now they have it in like a nanorod form, so it's a Q nanorod emitting display. That's QNED. But basically, you just want blue somewhere in the back, and then you have green and red quantum dots on the front of the display, turning that blue into green and red. Funnily enough, the guys over at AV Forum in the UK, they got some of the behind closed doors demo of the supposed quantum dot OLEDs at CES, and they're like, yeah, that is not ready. It is not coming in 2021. They're like, yeah, that's 5 years away, man. So we'll see what actually happens.
Yes, is there a specific number at which our eyes would stop resolving higher resolution displays? Yeah, we already reached it.
It's related to distance, right?
It's
distance
all about distance. Yeah, I mean, at 1080p, when you get to a certain distance, you can see the pixels. That's when you stop and then 4K you can get closer, and 8K you can get closer, and 16K you can get closer. But once you back up and get to the part where you can no longer see it, any differently, it's the same as just about it is as HD as HD can be.
Yeah, when we're talking about what can the eye resolve, we talk about arc minutes.
Right.
So 60ths of a degree. And basically for us to see two pinpoints of light as two separate pinpoints of light, as opposed to them blending together and looking like one pinpoint of light to us, there has to be 1 arc minute of separation between those two pinpoints of light. Now, if they're really far away, then 1 arc minute apart can be a fair distance between those two pinpoints of light. Whereas if it's right up close to your eye, like you might hold your phone right up to your face, well then 1 arc minute is a very, very short distance between those two pinpoints of light. So it all depends on how close you are to the pinpoints of light. The closer you are, the more densely packed together they have to be for us to not be able to see that they're two separate pinpoints of light, basically. But it's 1 arc minute separation.
Yeah. So is the difference in resolution going from 4K to 8K higher than the difference in going from 1080p to 4K? I believe the answer to this question is no. It's just a doubling, right? I mean, a quadrupling.
Well, it's a quadrupling. I mean, in sheer pixel count, it's bigger because we went from 2 million to 8 million. So that's 1080p to 4K.
If you take 4 1080p displays, and you put them together, and then 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top.
Yeah.
Right? You would still have a 16:9 screen.
Yes.
Okay? And it would now be 4K.
That's correct.
Now, you took that 4K display, you got 4 of those, and you did the same thing. So there was 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. You've now got 8K.
Or 16 times 1080p.
Right.
So in terms of sheer number of pixels, there's a greater difference in resolution going to from 4K to 8K, because we went from 2 million pixels to 8 million pixels from 1080p to 4K, and then we went from 8 million pixels to 32 million pixels 8K. Right. So in sheer number, it's a bigger difference. But in terms of our ability to resolve the different, again, it's all just about how close are we to those pixels and how far apart are those pixels. Because I mean, let's say you're standing 1 foot away from a 8K display, but that 8K display is 300 inches wide. Well, then the distance between each pixel is going to be pretty big. But if it's you're standing 1 foot away and it's only a 50-inch display and it's 8K, well, now those pixels are really, really close together and you'll never be able to tell them apart. So it's not just the number of pixels, it's how densely packed together they are and how far away you are.
That mental image of taking the 4 of each one of the previous generations and stacking them together, I think, to me, it tells the story of what's really going on here. Yes, there are numerically more pixels, but you can just see what they're doing as far as the pixel density. They're just essentially taking that same display and then shrinking it back down. You're taking 4 of them and shrinking it back down to the original size. You got a 50-inch, you put 4 50 inches together, you shrink it back down to a 50-inch, you now have a 50-inch 4K.
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yeah, and the pixels are jammed that much. But if you took 4 1080p displays, let's say they're just 55-inch 1080p displays, and you put 4 of them together to make a 4K, and then you kept the size exactly the same, but you took 4 of those 4 1080p displays and you put all that together, I mean, the pixel density hasn't changed. The pixel density stayed the same the whole time, but now you have a really big display that is 8K resolution.
Right.
Yep.
All right, we're stopping.
We are done. So we have Tom K, Gurinder, that's all Gurinder, Carl R, Stephen G, who wrote on Twitter, DK, Dean T, Ian again, actually, but it was so much later that I didn't combine his with he was like the first questioner, I think, this week. Anthony on Twitter, and that is everybody. Plus, people wrote in on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of this week, and got those questions. They'll be on the list for next week.
Well, if it stresses Rob out to do this Wednesday night, then we'll do it Tuesday night. So regardless, we're going to have to do it at night because
That's okay, yeah.
I don't have the bandwidth to do it during the day.
Yeah.
I got 3 kids on the computer and my wife working from home. So there's just no way I can do it during the day. And then at night, this is when this is the only
the leaving it right to the end of Wednesday makes it a bit tight for everything.
That's fine.
Let's
thank our listeners of the week. I want to thank Rohan and Andrew for going to avrant.com and clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. It's giving us a PayPal donation, as well as our 112 patrons over at patreon.com, including Nathan.
Indeed. Rohan, Andrew, thank you for the PayPal donations. Nathan, thank you for being one of our 112 patrons over at patreon.com/AVRant podcast.
I also want to thank Ben for talking us up to Accessories for Less, and Joseph for mentioning us to Mini DSP. And that special shout out goes to Nathan and Grinder for being part of the club that gives Rob a hard time every once in a while. And if you would like to send all those people who send me the hate mail anytime I give Rob a hard time, just make sure you mention Nathan and Grinder in the same.
Lovely.
Breath.
Yes, let's spread that around. Well, Ben, Joseph, thank you for mentioning us for Accessories for Less and Mini DSP, respectively. And thank you for being good community members, Nathan and Gurinder. It's all in good fun. And another big thanks to everyone who continues to express their gratitude for us keeping the podcast going. We enjoy that you're still listening. So thank you to everyone who is listening.
For AVRant, I'm Tom Mantry.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.